Book 2, Sections 29 through 31 of King Cole. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. King Cole by Upton Sinclair. Book 2, The Serfs of King Cole. Section 29. Mary made Hal swear that he would not get into a fight with Cotton. Then they went to number 2. They found the mules coming up, and the bosses promising that in a short while the men would be coming. Everything was all right, there was not a bit of danger. But Mary was afraid to trust Hal in spite of his promise, so she lured him back to number 1. They found that a rescue car had just arrived from Pedro, bringing doctors and nurses, also several helmets. These helmets were strange-looking contrivances, fastened over the head and shoulders, airtight, and provided with oxygen sufficient to last for an hour or more. The men who wore them sat in a big bucket, which was let down the shaft with a windlass, and every now and then they pulled on a signal cord to let those on the surface know they were alive. When the first of them came back, he reported that there were bodies near the foot of the shaft, but apparently all dead. There was heavy black smoke, indicating a fire somewhere in the mine, so nothing more could be done until the fan had been set up. By reversing the fan they could draw out the smoke and gases and clear the shaft. The state mine inspector had been notified, but was ill at home and was sending one of his deputies. Under the law, this official would have charge of all the rescue work. But Hal found that the miners took no interest in his presence. It had been his duty to prevent the accident, and he had not done so. When he came, he would do what the company wanted. Some time after dark, the workers began to come out of number 2, and their women, waiting at the pit mouth, fell upon their necks with cries of thankfulness. Hal observed other women, whose men were in number 1, and would perhaps never come out again, standing and watching these greetings with wistful, tear-filled eyes. Among those who came out was Jack David, and Hal walked home with him and his wife, listening to the latter abuse Jeff Cotton and Alex Stone, which was an education in the vocabulary of class consciousness. The little Welshwoman repeated the pit boss's saying, "Damn the men, save the mules." She said it again and again. It seemed to delight her like a work of art, it summed up so perfectly the attitude of the bosses to their men. There were many other people repeating that saying, Hal found. It went all over the village, in a few days it went all over the district. It summed up what the district believed to be the attitude of the coal operators to the workers. Having got over the first shock of the disaster, Hal wanted information, and he questioned Big Jack, a solid and well-read man who had given thought to every aspect of the industry. In his quiet, slow way he explained to Hal that the frequency of accidents in this district was not due to any special difficulty in operating these mines, the explosiveness of the gases or the dryness of the atmosphere. It was merely the carelessness of those in charge, their disregard of the laws for the protection of the men. There ought to be a law with teeth in it, for example, one providing that for every man killed in a coal mine, his heirs should receive $1,000, regardless of who had been to blame for the accident. Then you would see how quickly the operators would get busy and find remedies for the unusual dangers. As it was, they knew that no matter how great their culpability, they could get off with slight loss. Already, no doubt, their lawyers were on the spot, and by the time the first bodies were brought out, they would be fixing things up with the families. They would offer a widow a ticket back to the old country. They would offer a whole family of orphaned children maybe $50, maybe $100. And it would be a case of take it or leave it. You could get nothing from the courts. The case was so hopeless that you could not even find a lawyer to make the attempt. That was one reform in which the companies believed, said Big Jack with sarcasm. They had put the shyster lawyer out of business. Section 30. There followed a night and then another day of torturing suspense. The fan came, but it had to be set up before anything could be done. As volumes of black smoke continued to pour from the shaft, the opening was made tight with a board and canvas cover. It was necessary, the bosses said, but to Hal it seemed the climax of horror. To seal up men and boys in a place of deadly gases! There was something peculiarly torturing in the idea of men caught in a mine. They were directly under one's feet, yet it was impossible to get to them, to communicate with them in any way. The people on top yearned to them, and they, down below, yearned back. It was impossible to forget them for even a few minutes. People would become abstracted while they talked, and would stand staring into space. Suddenly, in the midst of a crowd, a woman would bury her face in her hands and burst into tears, and then all the others would follow suit. Few people slept in North Valley during those 2 nights. They held mourning parties in their homes or on the streets. Some housework had to be done, of course, but no one did anything that could be left undone. The children would not play. They stood about, silent, pale, like wizened-up grown people, over-mature in knowledge of trouble. The nerves of every one were on edge, the self-control of every one balanced upon a fine point. It was a situation bound to be fruitful in imaginings and rumors, stimulated to those inclined to signs and omens, the seers of ghosts, or those who went into trances, or possessed second sight or other mysterious gifts. There were some living in a remote part of the village who declared they had heard explosions under the ground, several blasts in quick succession. The men underground were setting off dynamite by way of signaling. In the course of the second day, Hal sat with Mary Burke upon the steps of her home. Old Patrick lay within, having found the secret of oblivion at O'Callahan's. Now and then came the moaning of Mrs. Zamboni, who was in her cabin with her brood of children. Mary had been in to feed them, because the distracted mother let them starve and cry. Mary was worn out herself. The wonderful Irish complexion had faded, and there were no curves to the vivid lips. They had been sitting in silence, for there was nothing to talk of but the disaster, and they had said all there was to say about that. But Hal had been thinking while he watched Mary. "Listen, Mary," he said at last. "When this thing is over, you must really come away from here. I've thought it all out. I have friends in Western City who will give you work, so you can take care of yourself, and of your brother and sister too. Will you go?" But she did not answer. She continued to gaze indifferently into the dirty little street. "Truly, Mary," he went on, "life isn't so terrible everywhere as it is here. Come away. Hard as it is to believe, you'll forget all this. People suffer, but then they stop suffering. It's nature's way, to make them forget." "Nature's way has been to beat me dead," said she. "Yes, Mary. Despair can become a disease, but it hasn't with you. You're just tired out. And if you'll try to rouse yourself," and he reached over and caught her hand with an attempt at playfulness, "cheer up, Mary. You're coming away from North Valley." She turned and looked at him. "Am I?" she asked, impassively, and she went on studying his face. "Who are ye, Joe Smith? What are ye doing here?" "Working in a coal mine," he laughed, still trying to divert her. But she went on as gravely as before. "Ye're no working man, that I know, and you're always offering me help. You're always saying what ye can do for me." She paused, and there came some of the old defiance into her face. "Joe, ye can have no idea of the feelin's that have got hold of me just now. I'm ready to do something desperate. You'd best be leaving me alone, Joe." "I think I understand, Mary. I would hardly blame you for anything you did." She took up his words eagerly. "Wouldn't ye, Joe? You're sure? Then what I want is to get the truth from ye. I want ye to talk it out fair." "All right, Mary. What is it?" But her defiance had vanished suddenly. Her eyes dropped, and he saw her fingers picking nervously at a fold of her dress. "About us, Joe," she said. "I've thought sometimes ye cared for me. I've thought ye liked to be with me, not just because ye were sorry for me, but because of me. I've not been sure, but I can't help thinking it's so. Is it?" "Yes, it is," he said, a little uncertainly. "I do care for you." "Then is it that ye don't care for that other girl all the time?" "No," he said. "It's not that." "Ye can care for two girls at the same time?" He did not know what to say. "It would seem that I can, Mary." She raised her eyes again and studied his face. "Ye told me about that other girl, and I been wondering, was it only to put me off? Maybe it's me own fault, but I can't make meself believe in that other girl, Joe." "You're mistaken, Mary," he answered, quickly. "What I told you was true." "Well, maybe so," she said, but there was no conviction in her tone. "Ye come away from her, and ye never go where she is, or see her. It's hard to believe ye'd do that way if you were very close to her. I just don't think ye love her as much as ye might. And ye say you do care some for me, so I've wondered." She stopped, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I been trying to work it out. I know ye're too good a man for me, Joe. Ye come from a better place in life. Ye've a right to expect more in a woman." "It's not that, Mary." But she cut him short. "I know that's true. Ye're only trying to save my feelin's. I know ye're better than me. I've tried hard to hold me head up. I've tried a long time not to let meself go to pieces. I've even tried to keep cheerful, tellin' meself I'd not want to be like Mrs. Zamboni, forever complainin'. But 'tis no use tellin' yourself lies. I been up to the church, and heard the Reverend Spragg tell the people that the rich and poor are the same in the sight of the Lord. And maybe 'tis so, but I'm not the Lord, and I'll never pretend I'm not ashamed to be livin' in a place like this." "I'm sure the Lord has no interest in keeping you here," he began. But she broke in. "What makes it so hard to bear is knowin' there's so many wonderful things in the world, and ye can never have them. 'Tis as if ye had to see them through a pane of glass, like in the window of a store. Just think, Joe Smith, once, in a church in Sheridan, I heard a lady sing beautiful music. Once in my whole lifetime. Can ye guess what it meant to me?" "Yes, Mary, I can." "But I had that all out with meself years ago. I knew the price a working girl has to pay for such things, and I said, I'll not let meself think about them. I've hated this place, I've wanted to get away, but there's only one way to go, to let some man take ye. So I've stayed. I've kept straight, Joe, I want you to believe that." "Of course, Mary." "No, it's not been 'of course.' It means ye have to fight with temptations. It's many a time I've looked at Jeff Cotton, and thought about the things I need. But I've done without. But now comes the thing a woman wants more than all the other things in the world." She paused, but only for a moment. "They tell ye to love a man of your own class. Me old mother said that to me before she died. But suppose ye didn't happen to? Suppose ye'd stopped and thought what it meant, havin' one baby after another, till you're worn out and drop, like me old mother did? Suppose ye knew good manners when ye see them, ye knew interest in talk when ye heard it." She clasped her hands suddenly before her, exclaiming, "Ah, 'tis something different ye are, Joe, so different from anything around here. The way ye talk, the way ye move, The gay look in your eyes? No miner ever had that happy look, Joe. Me heart stops beatin' almost when ye look at me." She stopped with a sharp catching of her breath, and he saw that she was struggling for self-control. After a moment she exclaimed defiantly, "But they'd tell ye be careful, ye daren't love that kind of man. Ye'd only have your heart broken." There was silence. For this problem the amateur sociologist had no solution at hand, whether for the abstract question or for its concrete application. End of Section 30. Section 31. Mary forced herself to go on. "This is how I've worked it out, Joe. I said to meself, ye love this man, and it's his love ye want, nothin' else. If he's got a place in the world, ye'd only hold him back, and ye'd not want to do that. Ye don't want his name, or his friends, or any of those things. Ye want him. Have ye ever heard of such a thing as that?" Her cheeks were flaming, but she continued to meet his gaze. "Yes, I've heard of it," he answered in a low voice. "What would ye say to it? Is it honest? The Reverend Spragg would say 'twas the devil, no doubt. Father O'Gorman, down in Pedro, would call it mortal sin, and maybe they know, but I don't. I only know I can't stand it any more." Tears sprang to her eyes, and she cried out suddenly, "Oh, take me away from here! Take me away, and give me a chance, Joe! I'll ask nothin'. I'll never stand in your way. I'll work for ye. I'll cook and wash and do everything for ye. I'll wear my fingers to the bone. Or I'll go out and work at some job and earn my share. And I'll make ye this promise. If ever ye get tired and want to leave me, you'll not hear a word of complaint." She made no conscious appeal to his senses. She sat gazing at him honestly through her tears, and that made it all the harder to answer her. What could he say? He felt the old dangerous impulse to take the girl in his arms and comfort her. When finally he spoke, it was with an effort to keep his voice calm. "I'd say yes, Mary, if I thought it would work." "It would work! It would, Joe! Ye can quit when ye want. I mean it." "There's no woman lives who can be happy on such terms, Mary. She wants her man, and she wants him to herself, and she wants him always. She's only deluding herself if she believes anything else. You're overwrought now. What you've seen in the last few days has made you wild." "No!" she exclaimed. "'Tis not only that. I've been thinking about it for weeks." "I know. You've been thinking. But you wouldn't have spoken if it hadn't been for this horror." He paused for a moment, to renew his own self-possession. "It won't do, Mary," he declared. "I've seen it tried more than once, and I'm not so old either. My own brother tried it once, and ruined himself." "Ah, ye're afraid to trust me, Joe." "No, it's not that. What I mean is, he ruined his own heart. He made himself selfish. He took everything and gave nothing. He's much older than I, so I've had a chance to see its effect on him. He's cold. He has no faith, even in his own nature. When you talk to him about making the world better, he tells you you're a fool." "It's another way of being afraid of me," she insisted. "Afraid you'd ought to marry me." "But Mary, there's the other girl. I really love her, and I'm promised to her. What can I do?" "'Tis that I've never believed you love her," she said in a whisper. Her eyes fell, and she began picking nervously again at the faded blue dress, which was smutted and grease-stained, perhaps from her recent effort with Mrs. Zamboni's brood. Several times Hal thought she was going to speak, but she shut her lips tightly again. He watched her, his heart aching. When finally she spoke, it was still in a whisper, and there was a note of humility he had never heard from her before. "Ye'll not be wantin' to speak to me, Joe, after what I've said." "Oh, Mary!" he exclaimed, and caught her hand. Don't say I've made you more unhappy. I want to help you. Won't you let me be your friend, your real, true friend? Let me help you get out of this trap. You'll have a chance to look about. You'll find a way to be happy. The whole world will seem different to you then, and you'll laugh at the idea that you ever wanted me." End of section 31.